My wife cheated on me for a year and planned to take our kids, but I found out the truth and... Hey everyone, I'm Jason, and I guess this is the last place I thought I'd be, but here we are. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 12 years. We've had a pretty solid relationship, or at least I thought so. We've got 2 kids, Ava, 8 and Luke, 5. Life was good, you know? But the last few months have been weird. I started noticing little things that didn't sit right with me. It all started with her sudden obsession with her appearance. Emily has always cared about looking good, but now it was different. It wasn't for me, it was for someone else, I could feel it. She'd bought new lingerie that I never saw her wear, she started going to the gym at odd hours, and she'd get defensive whenever I asked about her day. I brushed it off for a while, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. What tipped the scales was when she started lying. Little things, stupid things, but once the lies start, you can't stop noticing them. It's like the whole foundation of trust we had just began crumbling. I'm a patient guy, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I knew I had to dig deeper. It was a regular Tuesday night. I had just put the kids to bed, and Emily was out with friends, as she said. But something didn't feel right. She'd been out more and more lately, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I decided to check her phone. Not something I ever thought I'd do, but desperate times, right? Her phone was usually glued to her hand, but this time, she'd left it on the kitchen counter, like she didn't have a care in the world. My heart was racing as I picked it up. I told myself I wouldn't find anything, that I was just being ridiculous. But I was wrong. There it was. A string of texts to someone named Ryan. The messages were intimate. Things she hadn't said to me in years. She talked about missing him, about their last time together, and how she couldn't wait to see him again. My stomach dropped. But it wasn't just the texts, it was the pictures too. Selfies of her in the new lingerie, ones I'd never seen her take. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the nights she told me she was out with friends. I stood there in the kitchen, phone in hand, shaking. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. My wife was cheating on me. I didn't confront her right away. I mean, how could I? My mind was spinning, and I needed time to process everything. I went to bed that night and just stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to approach this. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to yell or scream, I wanted answers. I wanted her to tell me the truth, not some story she'd try to spin. When she came home from work the next evening, acting like nothing had happened, I waited until after dinner. The kids were in their rooms, and I asked her to sit down. She looked confused, maybe a little nervous, but she didn't know what was coming. "Who's Ryan?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Her face changed instantly, she went pale, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I saw your messages," I said, sliding her phone across the table. "Don't lie to me." She stared at the phone, frozen. For a second, I thought she might try to deny it. But then she just broke down. Tears started streaming down her face as she muttered, "It's not what you think." "Really?" I said, trying to keep my anger in check. "Because it looks exactly like what I think." She cried harder, trying to explain. "It was just a mistake, Jason. I didn't mean for it to happen, it just did. He means nothing to me." I sat there, listening to her excuses, feeling more and more detached from the woman I thought I knew. A mistake? This wasn't a one-time thing. This had been going on for months, and she had the audacity to call it a mistake. As she kept talking, I realized just how deep her lies went. She wasn't just seeing this Ryan guy, she was trying to downplay it like it was some meaningless fling, but the details didn't add up. I wasn't buying it. "You expect me to believe that? You've been sneaking around for months, Emily. This wasn't a mistake. It's a choice you made. Over and over again." Her face twisted from guilt to frustration. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, it was more than once. But I didn't want to hurt you, Jason. I don't know, things changed between us, and he was there. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You sent him pictures, you lied to me, and you kept this whole thing going behind my back. So, what now? Were you ever planning to tell me?" Her tears had dried up by now, and she was scrambling. I was going to end it. I was. "Stop lying, Emily." I cut her off, my patience gone. "Isav evating. You weren't planning to end anything." She looked down at the floor, defeated. "I didn't think you'd ever find out." And there it was. The truth. She never thought I'd figure it out, so she kept playing both sides, living this double life. After her confession, The weight of everything hit me all at once. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My wife, the mother of my kids, had been living a lie, and I was the fool who didn't see it coming. I couldn't even look at her. The betrayal was overwhelming, and I couldn't believe how coldly she had handled it. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. She sat there, staring at the table, and I just kept replaying the last few months in my head. The lies, the fake smiles, the nights she said she was out with friends. It felt like our entire marriage had been one big lie. How could you do this to us? To our family? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, eyes red and puffy from crying. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think. That's the problem, Emily, I interrupted, my anger rising again. You didn't think. You didn't think about me or the kids, or what this would do to us. All you thought about was yourself. She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, standing up and pacing around the room. I didn't want her touching me. I couldn't stand the thought of it. How could I even look at her the same way again? The woman I thought I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize anymore. I felt like I was on the verge of breaking down, but I held it together. I had to, for the kids, for myself. But inside, everything was shattered. I wasn't sure how to move forward or if I even wanted to. The hardest part about all of this wasn't the betrayal itself, it was thinking about how it would affect Ava and Luke. I couldn't stop imagining how this would turn their world upside down. They didn't deserve any of this, and I didn't know how to protect them from the fallout. As I paced the room, Emily's voice broke through my thoughts. What about the kids? What are we going to tell them? I froze. She hadn't even thought about them, not once during her affair. And now she wanted to talk about it? You should have thought about the kids before you decided to blow up our family, Emily, I said coldly. She winced but didn't say anything. I could tell she felt guilty, but guilt wasn't going to fix this. They don't know yet, but they're going to find out, I continued. You think they haven't noticed us fighting? You think they won't notice when I'm not around anymore? Emily buried her face in her hands, crying again, but I didn't feel any sympathy this time. I couldn't. She'd created this mess, and now she had to face the consequences. I don't want them to hate me, she whispered through her sobs. Hate you? I scoffed. They're going to be hurt, confused. And I'll be damned if I let them think this is okay. They need to know the truth, when the time comes. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. Please, Jason. Don't make them think I'm a monster. I shook my head. I won't have to. They'll figure it out on their own. After that conversation, I knew I couldn't stay in the house, not with her. Every time I looked at Emily, all I could see was betrayal. I needed space to think, to figure out what came next for me and the kids. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room, staring at the wall. I had no idea where to even start. I didn't want to uproot Ava and Luke's lives any more than I had to, but staying in the same house with Emily felt impossible. Emily came downstairs quietly, probably hoping I'd cooled off. She sat across from me, looking small and defeated. I'll do anything to fix this, Jason, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my jaw tight. There's no fixing this, Emily. You made your choice. Maybe we can go to counseling. Work through it for the kids' sake, she suggested, tears still in her eyes. That made me laugh, a bitter sound I couldn't control. You want to go to counseling now? After months of lying and sneaking around behind my back. I leaned forward, glaring at her. This isn't something you just fix with a few therapy sessions. She started crying again, but I was done comforting her. I'm moving out, I said abruptly. For now, at least. I'll find somewhere else to stay. The kids don't need to see us like this. Her eyes widened in panic. What about the kids? Where will you go? I'll figure it out, I snapped. I just need space. Her tears kept coming, but I couldn't care less. I had to start thinking about myself and the kids. This marriage was done. She had destroyed it, and there was no going back. I spent the next few days looking for a place to stay. I didn't want to burden any friends or family with this mess, so I rented a small apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I didn't tell the kids anything yet. I wanted to figure out how to break it to them without turning their world upside down. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished packing a bag when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You deserve to know the truth about Emily. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. There was no name, just an address for a coffee shop across town. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who could this be? And what truth were they talking about? My first instinct was to ignore it, maybe it was some prank, but something told me to go. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Emily had admitted. The next day, I showed up at the coffee shop. Sitting at a small table in the corner was a woman I vaguely recognized, Jessica, Ryan's wife. She looked just as tense and nervous as I felt. When she saw me, she waved me over. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "What's this about?" I asked, my heart pounding. She took a deep breath and leaned in, lowering her voice. "Ryan and Emily. They've been seeing each other for over a year. But that's not all." I gripped the edge of the table. "What else is there?" Jessica hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. "Emily's been lying to you about more than the affair. She's been planning to leave you for Ryan. They were going to take the kids and move in together. They've been looking at houses." I felt like the floor had just fallen out from under me. My whole body went cold as her words sunk in. "Leave me? Take the kids? She's been stringing you along, Jason. I thought you should know the truth before it's too late." That night, I couldn't sleep. Jessica's words kept replaying in my head. Emily was planning to leave me and take the kids. I had thought the affair was the worst of it, but now I realized it was just the tip of the iceberg. I couldn't let this go without confronting Emily. The next morning, after the kids left for school, I called her to meet me at the house. When she arrived, she looked anxious, probably sensing something was off. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. She sat down, looking uneasy. "About what?" I didn't waste any time. "I know everything, Emily. I know about your plan to leave me for Ryan. I know you were going to take the kids." Her face drained of color. "Who told you that?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "It doesn't matter," I snapped. "What matters is that you've been lying to me this entire time. You weren't just cheating, you were planning to destroy our family." She sat there in stunned silence, her guilt written all over her face. For the first time, I could see that even she knew there was no coming back from this. Emily sat there, speechless, her face pale as she realized I knew everything. For a moment, the silence hung between us, thick and unbearable. "Jason, I was going to tell you eventually," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me what?" "That you were leaving? That you were taking my kids?" "When, Emily?" "When it was too late for me to do anything about it." I couldn't control the bitterness in my voice anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I thought about the kids, how much this would hurt them, but "Stop," I interrupted. "You didn't care about the kids. You didn't care about me. You were thinking about yourself. About Ryan." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I meant every one of them. She wiped her eyes, trying to regain control. "It's not that simple." "No," I said, standing up. "It's exactly that simple. You betrayed me, Emily, and you were going to take everything I cared about." I watched as the weight of her actions finally seemed to hit her. But it was too late for her tears. The damage was done, and there was no way back. After everything came out, I knew I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. Emily had shattered any trust we had, and knowing she was ready to tear apart our family for Ryan made it impossible to even consider reconciliation. But the hardest part was thinking about how this would affect the kids. That night, after our confrontation, I went to the apartment I had rented and sat in the quiet, trying to figure out my next move. Divorce felt inevitable, but the thought of splitting time with Ava and Luke broke my heart. They didn't deserve this. I called a lawyer the next day. As much as it hurt, I knew I had to protect my future, and the kids. I wasn't going to let Emily take them and start a new life with Ryan as if I never existed. I had to fight for them. When I finally told Emily I wanted a divorce, she didn't fight it. She looked defeated, like she had expected this all along. "What about the kids?" she asked quietly. "We'll figure it out," I replied, trying to stay calm. "But I'm not letting you take them away from me." For the first time in this entire mess, she didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes filled with regret, but regret wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. The most dreaded part of all of this was telling Ava and Luke. I had no idea how to explain to them that their world was about to change forever. They were still so young, and I didn't want them to carry the weight of their mother's betrayal. Emily and I agreed we'd sit them down together. I didn't want to protect her anymore, but I also didn't want to hurt the kids more than necessary. They didn't need to know every detail. Not yet. We gathered them in the living room, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They knew something was wrong but hadn't asked yet. "Ava, Luke," I began, my voice steady but heavy. "Your mom and I have something we need to talk to you about. We love you both very much, but we've decided that we can't live together anymore." Ava's eyes welled up with tears immediately. Are you getting a divorce? She asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, feeling my heart break all over again. Yes, sweetheart. But this doesn't change how much we love you. We're both still here for you always. Luke, too young to fully grasp what was happening, just looked between us, confused. Will we still live together? He asked quietly. Emily finally spoke, her voice shaky. You'll spend time with both of us, just in different homes. We'll make sure you're always with one of us. I could feel the weight of their sadness, and it crushed me. This was what Emily's choices had led to, our kids hurt and scared, facing a future they never asked for. In the days that followed, the reality of our separation began to set in. The kids were adjusting as best they could, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. It killed me knowing that their home would never be the same again. Every time I dropped them off at Emily's, it felt like another reminder of what we had lost. Emily tried to reach out a few times, offering to talk things through, but I wasn't interested. What was left to talk about? She had made her choices, and I was done pretending like we could fix what was broken. I started focusing on making the apartment feel more like a home for Ava and Luke. I wanted them to have a space that felt safe and comforting, even if it wasn't the house they grew up in. I bought new furniture, put up their favorite posters, and tried to make the place as warm as possible. But every time they came over, I could tell they missed how things used to be. It wasn't easy trying to juggle my job, my emotions, and being a dad. There were nights I barely slept, thinking about how everything had gone so wrong. But I knew I had to keep going for their sake. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness or the anger, it was seeing how the kids had to carry the consequences of something they didn't cause. As the weeks went by, I started finding some clarity. The anger I had toward Emily was still there, but it began to settle into something else: acceptance. I realized I couldn't change what had happened. I could only focus on what came next for me and the kids. The kids were adjusting, slowly but surely. Ava was still quiet, struggling to understand why everything had changed, while Luke was more resilient, bouncing between homes without fully grasping the depth of what was going on. I made sure to be there for them, always reminding them that none of this was their fault. Emily stayed out of my way for the most part. She knew there was no going back, and any attempts at reconciliation were pointless. Ryan, as far as I knew, was still in the picture, but I didn't ask about him. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. I had more important things to focus on, like making sure my kids knew they still had a father who would never abandon them.
I started rebuilding my life.
Slowly, I found a routine, a sense of normalcy. Work became a welcome distraction, and when I wasn't with the kids, I began to enjoy my own company again. It wasn't easy, but with time, the weight of the betrayal started to lift. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this, but in a way, I was stronger. More focused on what really mattered: my kids, my future, and leaving the pain behind. Looking back, I can't say that this journey was anything but painful, but it's also taught me more than I ever expected. The betrayal was devastating, and the life I thought I had built with Emily is gone, but I've come to realize that losing her isn't the end of my story. In fact, it's just the beginning of a new chapter. I've learned that people change, sometimes in ways you never expect, and it's not something you can always control. What you can control is how you respond, how you protect yourself and the ones you love. Ava and Luke are still adjusting, but they're strong kids, and I know we'll get through this together. They've seen me at my lowest, but they've also seen me rise. If there's one thing I want them to learn from this, it's that no matter how bad things get, you can always move forward. You don't have to stay stuck in the past. As for Emily, I don't hate her anymore. The anger has faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance that we were never going to last. I hope she finds what she's looking for, even if it wasn't with me. To anyone reading this who's been in my shoes, you'll get through it. It won't be easy, and there will be days when it feels impossible, but there's life after betrayal. There's a future waiting for you that's better than you can imagine. You just have to keep moving forward.